Cartethyia has been out for a couple of days now, and now I think we've had enough time to where I can fully form my opinions on her. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about her performance within Tower, then her performance within Whimpering Wastes, and then finally I'm going to talk about each of the points I made in my pros and cons video and say if I was right about them or not. So first off, starting her performance in Tower, and one thing is abundantly clear when we test Cartethyia here, and that is that she is going to be one of the best options when it comes to clearing the Tower of Adversity. Now, I've seen a lot of mixed opinions on Cartethyia in Tower, but I feel that a lot of the uncertainty around Cartethyia's performance comes with the fact that, unlike most other DPS characters, Cartethyia doesn't straight up tell you how to play her. Let's take someone like Phoebe for example. Her kit straight up tells you how to use her. You activate her Absolution or Confession mode, you do 3 basic attacks, heavy attack, and you do that until you're out of Forte, while also making sure you have your skill up and using your Liberation whenever it's available. But with Cartethyia, you don't really have something like that. Sure, before you use your ultimate, you kinda do. You know you're supposed to Intra skill, do your 4th basic, then your skill and then a plunge. But the second you transform into Fleur-de-Lis, it's anything goes. So trying to get the optimal Fleur-de-Lis combo is something that a lot of people are still taking their time to do. So once you actually have the Fleur-de-Lis combo completely down and you have the most optimal combination, people are going to see a lot of performance increase when it comes to their Cartethyia within Tower of Adversity. Another thing that is to note about Cartethyia is the fact that almost all of her materials are new, so pre-farming for her was not really a thing that many people were able to do. This lowers the average build quality for Cartethyia. The Cartethyia I've been testing with also does not have a very good build, and oh boy, the teammates are somehow even worse. And despite that, I was getting pretty good clear times on Cartethyia. They were definitely a lot better than other characters like Jiyen or Sheng Liao. And when you compare them to some of the top tiers like Carlotta, sure, she wasn't exactly beating them, but again, the builds were very subpar. People have been comparing the Cartethyia Tower to the Zani Tower, but one thing that we have to make clear is that Zani was getting a lot more buffs in her tower than Cartethyia is getting in hers. The buffs in the current middle tower are a lot weaker than we've had for most recent characters. Additionally, the HP of this tower is higher than we are used to. So sure, Cartethyia might not be clearing as fast as Zani was when she was on release, but the tower simply has more HP, the builds for most people are worse, people don't fully know how to play Cartethyia yet, and then finally, this tower just has more HP. So ultimately, I think Cartethyia is still a very good unit in Tower, even if there is people that seem to disagree with this notion. I think over time, a lot more people are going to realize how powerful Cartethyia is when we get to more normal towers that are back to the regular amount of HP. And that brings me to Cartethia's performance in Whimpering Wastes, and I'm going to be completely honest here, I think Cartethyia in Whimpering Wastes is definitely not as powerful as Cartethyia within Tower. Don't get me wrong, it's still pretty good, but I'm not gonna act like it's some kind of insane power level that's above the rest of them, because that would just simply not be true. Cartethyia has a bunch of issues with multi-wave, which she is able to brute force through, but ultimately, it does lower her performance. There's nothing specifically that prevents Cartethyia from being good in Whimpering Wastes. There's not any multi-wave mechanics that Cartethyia specifically dislikes. It all comes down to the structure of her kit. Cartethyia actually cares about area erosion damage, because while she is in the Fleur-de-Lis form, she's buffing it by a very large amount. Additionally, her Liberation finisher is a lot of Cartethyia's damage output. So because it requires a certain amount of area erosion to be on the enemies to get the maximum amount of stacks, that also does lower her Liberation's damage. And because her Liberation is so much of her damage output, she also does kind of classify as a nuking character. But despite the fact that there's so many things that theoretically don't really synergize with the multi-wave game mode, Cartethyia still has very strong performance here. Her damage output while in the Fleur-de-Lis mode as well as during Cartethyia mode is nothing to be scoffed at, especially when you realize that almost every single attack that she has either has grouping or has very powerful AoE. This character is simply incredibly good at dealing with AoE scenarios, as expected of Arrow. That seems to be the gimmick with arrow DPSs, where they're really good at handling crowds, and Cartethyia is no different. So despite the fact that she does have some multi-wave related issues, I honestly can't say that Cartethyia is a bad character for Whimpering Wastes. She's definitely not in the top tier, I can recognize that. But don't let that stop you from thinking she's good in the game mode, because she is. You can look at the clear I'm running here, and as I said before, the builds on these supports are kind of tragic to be entirely real here. I'm even running the wrong set on Shakona. Rover doesn't even have the correct set either, and his substats are tragic. We're running the wrong main stats for God's sake because I'm running a Spectral Rover build. So yes, Cartethyia, while she's not top tier in Whimpering Wastes, is definitely still very good. And now let's finally dive into the points I made in my pros and cons video and see if I was right about them or not. Starting with the point that she is a Sentinel Resonator and is thus going to be incredibly powerful. And I'll just say this right now, I definitely think I was right here. While Cartethyia might not be dominating both endgame modes, I think her performance in tower definitely suggests that her power scaling was made to be good. Cartethyia was made especially powerful because Kuro knew she was going to sell incredibly well. And her performance in tower definitely does reflect this. Cartethyia is an incredibly powerful character, and while she may not be top tier within Whimpering Wastes, she's still powerful enough to make the game mode look like a joke. So ultimately, I do think I was correct here, but you definitely can argue that I ended up not being fully correct, and I'll completely understand if you do think this. For the second point, I said that she had good AoE. I talked about this during the Whimpering Waste segment, and yeah, she does have very good AoE. She has a lot of grouping within her abilities, and the abilities that don't group still have very good AoE. So when it comes to dealing with crowds of enemies, Cartethyia is able to deal with them incredibly easily. If they split up, she'll just be able to group them. If they're not being grouped, it's either a massive AoE attack, or the enemy is actively being slowed. So ultimately, even if enemies try to ungroup, Cartethyia will prevent them. So when it comes to having good AoE, Cartethyia is definitely very spot on. Then we get to the next point, which is that she is the best arrow DPS. And I also definitely still think this is true. Cartethyia is the strongest arrow DPS in the game in my opinion. While GN definitely can beat her within Whimpering Wastes, and for most people will beat her, I think their disparity in tower is large enough to make me say that Cartethyia is a better DPS overall. This is assuming that she is in her best team, however, because when you take those teammates away, GN will start winning again. So ultimately, when you look at both of these characters in their best teams, Cartethyia is going to end up winning. But the second you take away Shakona, that's going to be a massive damper on Cartethyia. But ultimately, I still think that it's fair to say Cartethyia is the best arrow DPS in the game. Then we go to the cons. The first thing I said about Cartethyia that was a negative was the fact that she relied on Shakona. And I'm gonna keep it real with you, Chief, I definitely think this is still the case. A lot of people have been telling me, oh, she doesn't need Shakona, she's completely fine with Sanhua. And while technically this is true, you have to consider the fact that the bar was never to clear endgame. If the bar to you is simply clearing endgame whatever means necessary, then we could say Chishia is a good DPS as well. But to me, being a good character depends on how you compete with other characters. If you go from the highest DPS in the game to losing to every single other limited DPS if they have their best team, simply by taking away one character, I'm gonna say that you're reliant on that character, and this is definitely the case when it comes to Cartethyia and Shakona. Then the next con I said was that she was going to take up Rover, and I'm gonna be honest, this isn't really that big in my opinion anymore, because Shorekeeper has proved herself to also be good with Cartethyia. And while Arrow Rover is better, Shorekeeper can definitely still do the job. The reason I said that taking Rover was a big deal was because the other Rovers had a lot of utility to new accounts. For example, Havoc Rover is one of the best free-to-play DPSs in the entire game. Another incredibly powerful free-to-play DPS is Phoebe, and she really wants either Spectral Rover or Shakona. So if you don't have Rover, two of the best free-to-play DPSs in the entire game suddenly become unavailable to you. But ultimately, I think Cartethyia serves just fine with Shorekeeper, but then let's be honest, we're taking Shorekeeper, we're still taking an incredibly wanted unit. And then the final point I had was some nitpicks about Cartethyia's multi-wave. Mainly the fact that air erosion stacks were going to be incredibly low on most enemies in multi-wave. And while this is true, it ended up having less of an impact than I thought. While it definitely did change Cartethia from a top tier character for multi-wave to a pretty good character for multi-wave, I still think that Cartethyia's performance in multi-wave is powerful enough to the point where I wouldn't really consider this to be a big deal. But what do you think of Cartethyia? Let me know in the comments below, and while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, join my Discord, which is linked in the description below. And if you want to see more of me as a person, be sure to check out my second channel, which is also in the description, as well as in the pinned comment. But that'll be all from me. Peace.